if we do this right, Toucan can help to correct some of the lack of transparency that some corporates are taking advantage of and kind of engaging in these greenwashing practices.
Welcome to Better Worlds, where we explore how Web 3.0 connects our natural, manufactured, and virtual realities to create better lives for all in a more equitable and sustainable way.
Welcome to Carbonomics with Better Worlds. I'm delighted to have John X with us, one of the founders of Toucan, one of the world's leading efforts in building the infrastructure to bring carbon markets to the public blockchain. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Julian. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for our conversation and to hear about all things Toucan and how you dove into Web3 and then the crypto and blockchain marketplace and what you're really building. And so let's maybe first start at understanding the ecosystem at large and what you guys are building out with Toucan.
Sure. Where to begin? At Toucan, we're building infrastructure to help $1 trillion worth of finance flow to the world's best carbon projects, the world's best impact projects, and we're doing this by taking a fresh look at what we see as a key leverage point in the world of carbon markets, which is really the registry, right? The actual digital infrastructure where these carbon credits live, and thinking of that as a coordination layer or tool across the entire value chain of a carbon credit. And by building this kind of improved digital infrastructure, we're hoping to create a system that allows all of these different players in the carbon market ecosystem, all these different stakeholder groups, coordinate more effectively around this idea of financing impact through this type of financial instrument. So yeah, I don't know if that's kind of what you were driving at, but that's at least one of the ways I think about it.
Yeah, no, I love to get that ecosystem overview right at the get-go. And I'd also love to learn a little bit more about you, John. So you go as John X in the crypto community, and you're also one of the co-founders of Astral and a lead with Kernel Region Guild, right? And how does that kind of fit into the larger ecosystem that you're activating?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to kind of do the whole origin story, but briefly, my path into Web3, I was working at an NGO when I started getting interested in crypto, thinking a lot about governance and peace and security issues, right? Human peace and security issues. And at the same time, learning about smart contracts and cryptocurrencies, tokens, thinking about how they might fit together. And took that interest into a master's course that I did, a course called Spatial Data Science and Visualization. And that really kind of fit together, unlocked a lot of insights into the ways we can track and measure environmental or human conditions in the real world using digital technologies, and then how we can connect those to smart contracts and create kind of some of these new financial applications that reflect changes in the real world somehow. So I didn't even really think about it at the time, to be honest, when I was going deep on how satellite imagery is collected and analyzed and how digital maps are created. But all that while thinking about decentralized applications eventually led to me meeting the couple of the other Toucan founders and seeing really how this really fits neatly into environmental asset markets with the trends towards digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, right? Verifying carbon impact using remote sensing, using IoT, using machine learning techniques. And I mean, yeah, kind of stuck in the middle there was I got involved, really lucky to get involved with this amazing fellowship program called Kernel, in the first kind of cohort they ran of the fellowship, and started talking about some of these ideas I had been thinking through in my master's research, and had just an amazing response from the community. A bunch of really smart people wanted to collaborate. A lot of them brought their own ideas that had a lot of symmetries, and that was sort of kind of where the ball really started rolling for me. Kernel, I felt like it was the sort of on-ramp into the heart of the Web3 movement, which I'm now definitely bought in hook, line, and sinker.
Right on. Yeah, thanks for giving us just a little bit of that overview. I do think it's always important to get a bit of the origin story to really start to dive deeper into the projects, and especially in your case between Kernel, Toucan, and Astral that you've done before. With Toucan, I'm really curious about the kicker or the most exciting piece of it, which I think is that anyone is really able to tokenize carbon projects or carbon credits, and come into that ecosystem and do so themselves. Can you explain that a little bit more and elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. I guess, the idea here is that we've built this, what we call the Open Climate Registry, right? And really think of this, I mean, you can think of it like a registry, like a database, right? Where we have different carbon impact projects that have been verified and certified by a standard body, and we can kind of bridge on or transfer on credits from that particular registry onto this Open Climate Registry that we have running on blockchains, and then within that, as tokens, the carbon credits have a lot more functionality and utility than they have in these kind of off-chain registries, right? So I kind of think of it as, well, the term within the carbon markets world is the meta registry, which really is just a registry that supports carbon credits or credits from different registries to all be kind of on the same one. So this does a lot in and of itself to harmonize a market which is quite fragmented in a lot of different ways. That's kind of the heart of it. And then we've built a couple of other, I kind of think of them as modules to unlock functionality for the asset class that you wouldn't have really been able to do very easily unless it was on a public blockchain. I think we'll probably talk about one, but one of them is this idea of carbon pools, which allows you to group together carbon credits that have a similar set of attributes and create a much more liquid token that has a lot more useful in other financial applications. That's kind of the essence of it. I think, so maybe just to summarize, the Carbon Bridge connects the Toucan Open Climate Registry to source registries set up by different standards and different kind of certifiers, brings them all onto this unified, harmonized Open Climate Registry, and that gets access to a lot of advanced functionality that's enabled by smart contracts.
Right on. And then in terms of the carbon pools, I think one of the first ones you collaborated with and worked with is KlimaDAO. Could you explain why you chose KlimaDAO and how specifically that collaboration looks?
So this was a decision that was made actually before I really joined Toucan. But the origin story is we wanted to figure out a way to create an incentive to tokenize carbon credits, right? Because we were building this new system, this new Open Climate Registry, and we knew that it could unlock a lot of benefits for the market if we did it right. But there had to be a reason for people to actually transfer their credits onto the registry. And KlimaDAO was an idea that was put forward, we connected with, I don't actually even know the details of the origin story, but it was a experimental carbon-backed currency that was based on a very successful model from the last market cycle, which is called Olympus DAO. And the complexities of it are quite honestly beyond me to fully kind of wrap my mind around. But it essentially creates real strong incentives to participate in the system through the use of rewards, right? So it inflates the currency and kind of pays people for participating in the system. And so Klima itself is really pretty much a pure fork of Olympus DAO. So they took the same incentive mechanics, copied the code over, and said, hey, instead of backing this with DAI, right, a US dollar stable coin, we're going to back this with carbon credits so that we have an incentive to draw carbon credits into our treasury and hold on to them. And that's basically it, right? Toucan is, we built most of the new code. We wrote most of the new code that had to be written to launch Klima DAO because Toucan is the infrastructure that Klima is built on. So the original kind of relationship was Klima putting forward designs of the types of credits that they wanted to pull into this pool that they had designed, which is called the base carbon pool. We worked with them a bit on that, but kind of their theory of change was based on buying up a lot of really low quality credits so that other corporates couldn't do that and kind of greenwash by making neutrality claims against them. And yeah, so they set up this whole system, and they kind of did a token sale and really caught a wave in the last bull run, and it ultimately meant that the experiment was a much, much bigger success, I think, than any of us expected. We were expecting, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of tons to be bridged, and it ended up being somewhere in the ballpark of 22 million. So it like the whole thing really, I think it deserves to be celebrated in the sense that it really jump-started on-chain carbon markets in a big way and really pulled the conversation forward within the voluntary carbon market that has already been kind of growing and building for the last 25 plus years, pulled it forward to say, hey, how can we actually use these advanced financial technologies responsibly? And that's now the conversation that we're having in the aftermath.
Yeah, totally. And that kind of brings me to another piece of that equation, and also to understand for people that are not as deep into both the infrastructure as well as the ecosystem and the mechanics of it as you are. So one of the big I think challenges is to really create transparency, to create an understanding of like proof of impact and sustainability on the ground where the actual carbon credits are, where the real life implications are. How is Toucan dealing with that? And what do you think is kind of the direction forward with that to continuously increase transparency so that this doesn't just turn into another, gambling cohort of like the crypto and Web3 world, but really into a real life implication to how we evolve our economy?
It's a great question, and the answer kind of points at some of the nuances of what we're trying to do and the complexity of it. I mean, so I think first of all, I'll say we talk about transparency. We talk about transparency in blockchains. We talk about transparency in carbon markets. And I think actually that term, it applies in so many different places, and it's worth kind of teasing out specifically what that means. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But overall, I think we've chosen to put ourselves in a pretty interesting position, right? Because we've kind of stuck ourselves into the middle of two very complex domains, right? Voluntary carbon market and Web3 blockchain consensus technologies, I think about. And as the infrastructure providers that's really designed to use the best of the Web3 world to support the high integrity scaling of the voluntary carbon market world, we face some decisions around what we open our infrastructure up to. It's a sort of neutrality versus being a gatekeeper to help ensure quality and integrity, right? So the impulse is we want to be open and neutral. We're not soil scientists. We're not forestry experts. We're not the climate scientists that should be the ones who are making judgments about the quality of credits. We're not in a position to be judging that. But at the same time, we do know that there are some integrity concerns that have been raised about the quality of a lot of credits that are still actively in circulation on in a lot of the registry systems that are certified by some otherwise quite reputable standards. So we're now kind of facing this balancing act of kind of recognizing that our role is as technologists to build the digital rails for climate finance, but really still to be true to our founding values, which is creating a material impact on the climate crisis as quickly as we can. And so what are we doing? I mean, there's a couple of layers here. So we've been thinking about version 2 of Toucan since well before we even launched, actually, because we built it more or less as a MVP or a proof of concept to say, hey, we've got the basic functionality here for this to work, but we also know there are some limitations to what we're building, and it was beyond the scope of what we could build at that time. And now we're kind of going back and saying, cool, how could we have improved this? So one piece, for example, is improving the transparency of the supply side. And we're doing that by thinking really hard about how we can design Toucan so that it's a natural place for credits that are backed by digital MRV verification techniques, right? To live. So things like, where do we store satellite imagery? Where do we store drone scans? How do we make it very easy for consumers to check to make sure that these impact claims, which is essentially what a carbon credit is, that they agree with the people that certified that impact claim and brought that carbon credit to life. And then another kind of point where I think we're in a position to really drive a lot of transparency in the market is actually in that market layer that sits between supply and demand. So at the moment, a lot of carbon deals that are happening are taking place basically via email, right? So this is negotiated via email. It takes days, sometimes weeks. A lot of times deals fall through because someone was trying to sell something that ended up getting sold by somebody else, but by the time they get back to the email, it's gone. And also, a lot of these prices are only being shared in private, which means nobody knows really what a fair market price is for some of these credits. And so with Toucan, a lot of that market functionality, a lot of that transaction data, the trading data, is available for anyone to see, right? With our carbon pools, anybody can see what you can buy NCT and BCT for any time of day, anywhere in the world. And if you want to buy it, the transaction takes a couple of seconds and the settlement is final and it's in your account, and there you go. So that's another piece, I think, where on that market layer, bringing visibility into transaction patterns and pricing information about this is a way we can really shine a light and help the market engage in kind of buying and selling credits in a more informed way, and hopefully kind of drive a lot more fairness and equitability there. And I think the last piece is on the demand side, right? A lot of people buying carbon credits are buying them to make neutrality claims. And there's a lot of criticisms being raised right now on this practice of making climate neutrality claims, because a lot of times the basis of the claim is not actually open for anyone to see. So a company might say, hey, we're net zero. We've reduced our emissions, and now we've also offset our residual emissions, or we've offset our emissions to kind of, but they don't show what credits they retired to make that claim. And so it could be that they're retiring credits that aren't actually credibly kind of high integrity credits that represent a ton of carbon dioxide that's been abated or removed. And with Toucan, we have also the ability to basically show your retirement portfolio as part of this neutrality claim. And so, I think there's a lot of different meanings to the word transparency. There's a lot of different meanings to the word integrity. And it's worth kind of, hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into, it applies at many different places in the system. And we're really kind of thinking through all of them in parallel.
Yeah, thank you already for that answer and giving us more insight into that. I think you mentioned one very specific thing there, and that's like the development of price discovery. And how do you think this is going to continuously evolve going forward with different political issues in different places around the world, but then also just with the different types of carbon credits that there are, and yeah, with the different incentives that everyone is playing that market, right? As you said, like some companies might have a very different incentive just to find that claim of being net zero, but we got to really understand if that's a true factual statement. So like what really determines the price, and maybe as part of that question also, like how do you explain the fluctuation in price over the last 12 months and more?
As the market matures, right, and as the consumers mature, then they're going to learn to ask better questions about the carbon credits they're buying. And I think that this is a really important thing, right? Because what we don't want to do is we do not want to have the carbon offsetting industry be spending money and that money not actually making an impact on the climate, right? Like that's the basis of a lot of the criticisms of the voluntary carbon market and the offsetting practices. And I think those criticisms really have some basis, right? So that's one of the forms of waste that we're really trying to minimize with Toucan. So things like consumers asking for better data about the projects, right? This DMRV movement of we're looking at drone scans, we're looking at soil samples, measurements of biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. Can I actually see that data? Can I analyze that data for myself? It's not even necessarily that most consumers will do that, but just having that data open and probably a couple of auditing or ratings firms sitting there looking at this and doing some due diligence on behalf of the broader market. That's another trend that I'm really excited about, that there's an extra layer of scrutiny with companies like Silvera, like B0, that are taking an independent look at this and saying, okay, cool, these are certified by the standards, that's great, but let's also double check that and make sure that we agree that these are really highly additional, highly permanent, and so forth. So I think a lot of it comes down to maturity on the demand side. I also am really excited about the kind of role that curators play, because a lot of people don't have the expertise to really judge what a high quality carbon credit is, but there is a role for these kind of trusted quality curators that say, hey, we've put together a portfolio, we've done the work to understand that we think these are high quality projects, and then we're going to make the sales process real simple for you as a corporate to just kind of plug in and buy this without kind of dealing with a lot of the overhead that some companies in the market are dealing with, like Stripe and Microsoft, but those are real outliers, right? Because they've kind of aligned strategically with this is an important role to play. Most companies aren't going to do that, right? Most companies are just going to say, hey, let's just almost tick this box, and we want to make sure that the act of ticking that box is actually making a big difference for the climate. How that translates into pricing, I mean, I think the goal obviously is that price reflects quality. That's always kind of the goal. And I think those trends are all going to drive towards that. We're working on some functionality within Toucan to resolve some of or improve on some of the functionality we've got in version 1. So one example is right now the pools are quite a blunt instrument for finding price discovery on a particular category of credits, right? The price tends to settle towards the lowest quality credits that are eligible for that pool. And we're really thinking hard about ways in which we can have accurate pricing of these different carbon credits across the value spectrum, and not just in those bands that kind of concentrate right at the lower end of the pool eligible credits. That's a little bit of the curtain. I mean, I think you probably could pull in some people that have a lot more insight into the pricing from the VCM, and they could unpack it quite a bit more. But that's, I guess, my take.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your take on it, John. And I think it's important that we have those kind of conversations to understand what is the complexity, what is the issue with transparency, what is the issue with auditability, and how do we resolve it so that carbon credits are not yet just another thing that kind of ends up being a greenwashing tool, right? But actually helps us to directly connect let's call them good deeds for environment and planet, to the very complexified marketplace that, hopefully will become much more transparent and direct as we go into that next age of technology. And that's my next question for you. Like, let's zoom out on the timeline, 12 months, 24 months into the future. Where do you think this market is developing into? What do you think, what we will see in terms of how these technologies really make real life impact and help us remove and remediate greenhouse gases and the whole climate impact at large?
So I think a couple of things. I think all the signs are that this is set to just continue to grow. And I think we're early enough in the process of scaling that we have the opportunity to really make some adjustments and rehabilitate the VCM's perception by the public, right? Like, this is the target of major criticisms from world famous comedians like John Oliver. And, I think a lot of the criticisms are really valid. And if we don't take that on board and adapt, then I think they're not going to have the impact that they could have in lowering the Keeling curve and actually decarbonizing the atmosphere in a quick amount of time, right? So I think listening to those criticisms, taking them on board, and I see Toucan as a big part of that, right? If we do this right, Toucan can help to correct some of the lack of transparency that some corporates are taking advantage of and kind of engaging in these greenwashing practices. I think also, like I said, the role of ratings agencies, they have a big role to play in that as well, and the standards as well, right? I also think, well, I know the trends are towards the kind of recognition by a lot of the incumbents that what we're doing has a lot of value. And to be honest, in private conversations, this has been recognized from the beginning, from the first conversations we had with some of the big standards. But I totally get it. Like, they've got to do their due diligence, right? They've got to think this through. They've got to think through risks. And I really appreciate the amount of care they're taking. I think, so I expect and hope that we're going to see some progress with getting authorization, Web3 generally, right, to getting authorization to tokenize credits from major standards in the next months. A big question is, what kind of restrictions or what are the asterisks? What are the compliance kind of, how do we actually comply with the recommendations or the requirements that they put forward? And my view is that I think we've got to definitely take a risk managed approach, but I really think it's important that we don't shut down access to a lot of the value proposition of tokenizing carbon credits on public blockchains, which to me, a big part of that is the composability of Web3 and the fact that as tokens, carbon credits can access this crazy landscape of decentralized finance. And I say crazy not because it's necessarily risky. Yes, there are certain risky experiments going on, but there are also a lot of extremely reliable systems that have weathered what has been one of the most dynamic fluctuations in the history of financial markets in the last couple of years and have stayed performing exactly as they were designed to. That level of reliability is, I think, really shouldn't be overlooked. And if we can connect carbon markets with some of that financial utility and get exposure to the kind of immense innovation that's happening right now in DeFi, that to me is a real powerful kind of lever to pull. So I'm hoping that the standards take a bit of a risk in kind of opening up permission so that we can actually take advantage of the fact that these registries run on public blockchains. And one other thing, I was actually just talking with a friend about it earlier today at lunch. I think we'll see more competition from big corporates. This is what she said. She asked me the same question, and I thought that was really smart. We've seen, Salesforce is jumping in here. We see trends towards some of the big corporates really seeing an opportunity and trying to address it. And I think my hope there is that we can build with these people, right? Because ultimately, Toucan especially, we're trying to build infrastructure to underpin the whole market, and that includes people, players like Salesforce, players like Senkin, like Web3 and Web2 projects building on top of the registry infrastructure that we have, and all hopefully contributing to the network effects that form around it, right? So that's where I hope to see us go. I think overall, I'm feeling really quite optimistic. I think it's an exciting time. It's been a crazy year, to say the least, and I really feel like things are maturing nicely and developing nicely, and it feels like we're these sort of like techno optimists, and we're really excited, and we really want to see progress, and we're all really passionate about climate action, and to me at times it's felt like we're moving too slowly. But when I take a break and zoom out a little, I'm like, we've made a huge amount of progress in the last year or two. We're seeing some real kind of movement within an industry that has historically been quite slow. They're like really switched on about this and getting smart about it really quickly. And I think that all those signs are really good. So yeah, I feel good. I mean, it's not all perfect, of course, but I think things are definitely trending in the right direction. And I think in the next few years, we'll have the opportunity to really show the potential of what we're doing, and hopefully kind of, as I say, make some of the adjustments at the sort of infrastructure layer of the VCM, so that we can, as we go into the next decade or two, scale in a much higher integrity way, all coordinating around this new technologies that we're all developing.
Yeah, thank you for your answers, and also for like the elaborateness of how you describe the marketplace, the technologies, and also the vision that you see and the optimism that you bring into the mix. I have a last question for you, and it's about the advice you would give to our audience in the evolving blockchain space, but also how to really connect with and make impact on the environmental sphere in a positive way.
It's a great question. The deeper I get into this, the more I recognize the complexity and the nuances of it. And I think the advice probably would be to, I suppose, have a little bit of faith, or a little bit of kind of optimism that these people that we often spend a lot of time kind of demonizing in our society, right? Politicians, business leaders. I think for the most part, these are good people, and I think they're doing their best. And there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of kind of pressures behind what they're doing. So that's not to say don't call out things that you see that you don't think look right? But I think we've got some real work to do to repair the way we relate to each other as humans, and really kind of move towards enrolling the support of everyone. Because I can tell you what, if we don't have senior leadership at the Fortune 500 companies on board with this, if we don't have senior leadership at the United Nations and at the big global institutions, IMF, World Economic Forum, the central bank, those are major dominoes to fall in terms of enrolling support. And so I think yeah, just kind of acknowledging the complexity of this, and kind of embracing that and accepting that in order to build something that is deeply considered, you have to consider it very deeply, and that takes a long time, and it means thinking about it from different perspectives. As far as advice, I'd love to get some advice from the audience, honestly. I think for me, a lot of it comes down to thinking about what's in my sphere of influence, right? Like, what do I have control over, and really focusing on that. And for some people, that's teaching their children about these issues, and kind of raising people that have an awareness of this, right? For other people, it might be talking to their friends and who they know are in a position where they can actually influence some sort of policy or corporate decisions, and asking questions and hopefully helping them to lead towards integrating these kind of thinking into their worldview. So it might be it's a bit of a kind of non-answer, because it's a sort of figure it out for yourself. But I think there's obviously no one size fits all, right? It's more about being aware of the issues at hand, and then really thinking about what can I do from my position to make a little difference, and just focusing on that and focusing on them doing that well, and then also making sure that we enjoy the world as it is, because it's such a beautiful place. And if we're not connecting with that, then we spend all of our time kind of working to save something that we really are missing an opportunity to actually experience deeply. I find a lot of inspiration personally from going out into nature and just immersing myself in that, and then that kind of galvanizes me to come back to my laptop and spend days on end kind of typing away.
I guess that's the difference between, you know, the techno optimist who works for the well-being of nature than the technocrat who is just trying to complexify everything. So I really like that distinction that you brought in there, because you called yourself a techno optimist earlier. No, I hear you, and I very much relate to that. The inspiration happens in the silent space, happens in the natural space, and then maybe our job is to continuously find ways how to make the world and the operations of the world more transparent and more insightful, and also more effective, right? So thank you so much, John, for your time, for your answers, for your wisdom, for your shares, for the work you do with Toucan and with Kernel, and with other projects you're involved in. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate the work you're doing as well. I know you're bringing a lot of inspiration to a lot of people, so thank you.